Hello and welcome to another episode of the Omnibus Podcast, Minnesota's best weekly breakdown of political news inside and outside the Capitol. I'm your host, Jeremy Munson, former state representative from southern Minnesota, and as usual, we're joined by Representative Walter Hudson from District 38. Walter, bills continue to move at breakneck speeds through the legislature. I just caught wind of a new bill that was introduced that's going to create a new tax. Now, we're talking about a state with a 17.68 billion dollar tax surplus, and they're creating, not just raising taxes, they're creating a whole new tax called a delivery tax that will be added to every package that's delivered from Minnesota. Actually, it's every retail order. So if you have multiple orders delivered in one box, they'll tack on a 50-cent tax for each retail item that's delivered. And that starts out at 40 cents, goes up to 45, then 50 cents, and who knows where it goes from there. This is at a time when Amazon has decided to pull out of Minnesota because of the taxes and regulations. And Brad Tabke, who represents Shakopee, where Amazon was located or is located, is an author on this tax. Now, I imagine that this bill is being sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce, the Minnesota Retailers Association, as a way to kind of box out competition from out of state. But this is going to have serious impacts for all Minnesotans, including me. I get a lot of stuff delivered by Amazon because I live out in rural Minnesota. Do you think there's an appetite in the legislature to pass a new tax on Minnesotans when everybody's hurting so bad?
Yes, that's the short answer. Is there an appetite in a Democrat-controlled legislature to raise taxes? Yes, always and every time. And, as you point out, we're sitting here with if you round it up, $18 billion state budget surplus. And not only are they going to spend every single cold dime of that, but they're also going to raise taxes and already have. I mean, not just creating new taxes like this one, but things like fees and tabs are all going up. I mean, the last number I saw was north of almost $700 million. I mean, well over $500 million in fees that they were going to raise. Just nuts. At a time when, again, we just got done with a campaign where their major vulnerability was the economy and the Biden walls inflation and how hard, and of course, everything that they're selling in terms of, we need to open up health and human services, turn the spigot wide open. We need to fully fund education. We need to create an entire new department. The committee on which I sat, Children and Families, we need to create an entire new state department of children and families to meet the needs of people who are having it hard. Yeah, they're having it hard because of your policies, because of the things you are doing, because you are pretending as though money is grown on trees. I don't know if you saw that comment. Did you see that from Dave Pinto?
Yes.
The chair of my Children and Families Committee yesterday in committee literally said he portrayed this new department that they want to create as, quote, a magic money tree, unquote. And he means it. He believes that, quote unquote, investment in public education, human services, early childhood, that's going to translate into saved money down the road. And that's going to be a net gain of 13%. You're going to have to explain that math to me. I don't know how it works, but the point here is they don't see what they're doing as costing anything at all. So when your tax bill goes up, when your costs go up, your prices, because that's what's going to happen, right? To the degree that Amazon has to tack on that extra 50 cent an item tax onto your item, they're not going to eat that. They're going to pass that on to you. So your life gets more expensive, your taxes go up, you're not getting increases in wages, right? Inflation is making the dollars you do have worth less. So your quality of life is going down right now. And their justification for it is, just wait and see. Eventually, somewhere down the road, there's going to be all these positive externalities that are going to make your life better. Don't ask us when, and don't expect them anytime soon. But at some point way down the road, it's all going to be worth it.
Yeah, and if you dig into the bill, it's House File 580. The allocation of money that's collected gets distributed into 3 different accounts. 60% of the money goes into the Highway User Tax Distribution Fund. The 36% goes into the metropolitan area transit account, so buses and choo-choo trains, and then 4% goes into the Greater Minnesota Transit account. So 4% of that money goes out to rural Minnesota, because we know a majority of the highway user tax money probably goes to the metro as well. It's just a way to fund more transportation projects that are not car related, and it's a tax on it's a I mean, this is a substitute for the fuel tax. We know that Democrats could probably see some resistance if they wanted to implement a 20-cent per gallon gas tax. That would be the death of them. But this tax will probably it basically rake in tons of money. And this is at a time when one of the last grocery stores in North Minneapolis, the big Aldi Foods, is closing, and people will probably have either Amazon deliver groceries or go to one of the other larger metropolitan grocery stores that deliver to their house and have grocery items delivered, and this fee will apply to that. And it
Right.
even is applied to groceries and clothing, which we don't tax in Minnesota because they're deemed essential. So they're going to be collecting an enormous amount of revenue on the backs of hardworking Minnesotans who are busy working two jobs and don't have time to stop by the store and have stuff delivered. This is an enormous tax on Minnesotans.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's the side of the equation that is never taken into consideration or is dismissed through this magic money tree. What do they call it? Modern monetary theory, that we can never spend too much, right? And that was kind of one of my part of my rebuttal on Twitter to Pinto is, well, if this is true, if we get an automatic 13% return on investment on whatever we invest, why not invest $100 quadrillion? I mean, why limit it at 12 million, right? But that's the mentality that they're operating from, is that there's no such thing as too many taxes. There's no such thing as too much spending. There is no functional limit. And that was the context in which we were having this conversation yesterday in committee. Is I was asking them, as they're presenting their vision for this grand new brave new world, where is the functional limit to how much you're going to spend and how much you're going to invest, quote unquote, into this new monstrosity? And they cannot give you an objective ceiling. They cannot define what the limit is, because in their minds there is none.
Yeah. Well, I want to point out some hypocrisy too, because Democrats just last year or 2 years ago, is it 2021, passed a bill to put price caps on delivery services. Grubhub and DoorDash and Uber Eats, they thought that delivery fees were excessive, and they wanted to put price caps on there. Well, where are these companies supposed to, put in the, I mean, there's a cost to deliver. So
Right.
where is that going to go? Right. Just let the market work and stop trying to manipulate things, and stop taxing the crap out of people. Another big issue in the last week was that the Office of Legislative Auditor, or the OLA, which is a nonpartisan, just a bunch of analysts that look at data, were directed by the legislature to investigate the nonprofits who have been bilking taxpayers out of hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, I think there's some good nonprofits out there, but when they get involved and when they start feeding on the government teat, it tends to a lot of legislators look the other way as they just start bilking taxpayers for money. And the Republicans talk about these programs as public private partnerships, which sounds good because Republicans typically want the private sector to do the work that government is doing. But when nonprofits get involved, where they can pay the CEO of their nonprofit an exorbitant amount of money, things tend to go wrong. So the OLA was asked to look into the government funding of these programs, what types of oversights, what types of reporting and follow through are on these programs. And you heard from the OL auditor. What did you hear? Are we in a good position? Is the money nice and tight and everything's accounted for?
No, I'm giving you nice, short, concise answers today. This time it's no. I'm looking here. This is it. This is the report from the Office of the Legislative Auditor. It is 79 pages long, and the print is fine. There is a lot of information in here, but the summary is this, and these are their words: pervasive noncompliance. Pervasive noncompliance with grant management practices. And that's an accusation directed at the state agencies who are tasked with administering these grants. What that means is that the processes which are in place, to the extent that any processes are in place at all, because a lot of times when the way these bills are written, there's little to no oversight ingrained that goes along with any of these grants. Some of these grants, there's not even a reporting requirement, right? Like we're just going to give you the money and not even ask you what you did with it. That's how lax some of these arrangements are. But to the extent that there are requirements for accountability, reporting, and what have you, the term that the OLA came up with was this pervasive non-compliance, and they say that it's due to a lack of statutory authority to enforce compliance. In other words, there isn't enough teeth put into the provisions to provide the agencies with the ability to hold these grant recipients, these nonprofits, accountable. And certainly you can get some some bipartisan agreement on that point. But what the Democrats are saying, and what was manifest in the comments and questions that were coming out of the joint committee hearing on this report that I just came out of before sitting down with you, is they're blaming this on lack of funding and lack of resources. So they're trying to portray this as we're not giving the state agencies enough money to do their job, and that's why the job isn't being done. Well, our member Ben Bakeberg, who happens to be a former principal and school administrator down in his district down around Jordan, made the very excellent point that basically what you're trying to tell us is that we at the legislature have provided an unfunded mandate to the state agencies, and you're offering that up as an excuse for why you can't do your job. I don't get to do that as a principal. I don't get to do that as a school administrator. We got unfunded mandates all the time, and we're expected to still do our job, and we are held accountable. So there's a lack of uniformity there in terms of what the expectations are between different units of government. I sat on a city council. You've got various work in your background. You know how these things work. This has been, in my view, a hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil situation where there's a large extent to which we don't want to know what's going on with these nonprofits. And another thing that the Office of Legislative Auditor noted is that one of the biggest problems where this noncompliance comes into play is with named grants. So a grant where we say, the organization, people coming together for fun and sunshine, like whatever, we name the group, and we're saying they get $2 million to make the world a happier place. That there's extraordinary difficulty in holding that group accountable because you have written into statute that they get to have that money. And there are certain circumstances where they can withhold the money for a period of time, but they can't just decide they're not going to give it to them because you've put in statute that the legislature, the state, is to grant this money to this group. And it was really fascinating the tone with which that point was received by the Democrats in this joint committee hearing, because it was, on more than one occasion, there was a comment to the effect of, yeah, well, we're going to do it anyway, right? Like this is something that happens, and so we're just going to have to deal with it, and then trying to pivot back to the point about the agency being under-resourced. And the total failure of the governing majority, in my view, to acknowledge the core source of this problem is that this is a 100% legislatively created problem. That's the source. We are the source. The legislature, the state house, and the state senate. We are the source of this problem because we are the ones who are coming up with these schemes to provide grants, which is to say, what a grant is it's me handing your money to somebody else. That's what it is. Okay. A state grant is me taking your money that we've taxed from you after you've expended your effort in order to earn it. And then I'm handing it over to somebody else because the premise is they're going to spend it better than you will. They're going to spend it on something that really matters to me, and that's more important than whatever mattered to you. That's the fundamental underlying moral premise of state grants. All right. Now, the reason why this doesn't work should be pretty obvious. All right. And it's very important that we're considering this in this moment when, as I mentioned earlier, the state and the legislature and the committee on which I sit is contemplating creating a brand new state department, a brand new state agency to govern early childhood. Okay. It's called Children and Families. That's the jurisdiction. They want a department of your family. Okay. And they're not going to address any of these fundamental underlying structural and systemic problems that are manifest and highlighted and pointed out by this OLA report. To really simplify it for you here, the problem here is that we have removed the inherent regulatory mechanism of price from these interactions. When I take this process, when I say, I really like what the people coming together for sunshine and happiness to give good things to kids, I really like that group as a legislator. And so instead of taking money out of my pocket or fundraising on their behalf out in the market and saying this group's doing good work and raising money for them, it's much easier for me. I can be the hero really quickly by just authoring a bill and having it jacketed and shopping it around to my friends and then having a hearing and then passing it off the floor. And presto whizzo, you got yourself $5 million. And you didn't have to ask a single person for it because the legislature did it for you. At that point, past that point, once that transaction is made, I, as the legislator, have received everything I need. I get the political credit for having done something nice for sunshine and rainbows. The organization gets what they want, which is the $5 million or whatever the grant amount is. And then that's it. We wash our hands and we move on. There's no looking back. And the people who have to actually pay, the taxpayer, have nobody looking out for them to determine whether or not that money is actually being utilized in the manner for which it was intended. And my point is, none of that needed to happen. If you just didn't have this way of doing things in the first place, if you didn't dole out public money to every group that you think is doing something amazing in the state, then you wouldn't have to have statutory authority to enforce compliance. You wouldn't have to worry about pervasive noncompliance. You know where you don't find pervasive noncompliance? Any place that has a shingle outside that says open for business. You don't have pervasive noncompliance with customer expectations at your local oil change place, or if you contract with somebody to plow your driveway, because there's inherent incentives to get it right. Right? I can choose whether or not I'm going to exchange value for value. And because I know my reputation is on the line, I'm going to make sure that that value is exchanged as advertised. And I'm going to do it every day. We call it quality control out in the marketplace. That's what this is. This is a quality control issue. And the reason why the quality is not being controlled is because there's nobody in place with an incentive to do it. Where would the incentive come from? I don't have an incentive as a politician who already got what I wanted, which is credit for handing out money to fun time, sunshine, and happiness. I already got what I wanted, so I have no incentive to ensure quality. The group that I'm handing the money to has their money. They have no incentive to ensure quality. And these agency employees, state employees, they've got a lifetime position with wonderful benefits and compensation. All they have to do is keep their head just low enough to keep coming into work every day. Their incentive is to do as little as possible and be able to keep their job, which is, as it turns out, precisely what they're doing. That's what pervasive noncompliance means. So none of this should be surprising. All of this just fully proves conclusively in real time the market economic theory that ought to be informing our public policy, but currently is not.
There's no one in St. Paul that's fighting for the taxpayer and that's fighting for the ratepayer for electrical rates. The utilities, the corporations, they're lobbying the legislature, but very few people are actually fighting for the taxpayer and the ratepayer. When I was in the health committee and we had bills come through that would be creating grants to nonprofits, if you read the legislation, most of it is really, it's small. It's, just a few lines. But if you look for holes in that legislation, you can find a million ways to use that money outside the legislative intent, but within the letter of the law. There was money that was going to deliver millions of dollars for HIV prevention. And it was written in a way that said that money will be used in the communities most at risk for HIV. And so I know what the legislative intent is. It's to use it in the LGBT community, or, in certain areas where the rates are high. But I asked the bill testifier, could this money be sent to Africa? Is Africa not the community with the highest infection rate and the greatest need for this money? And they're like, well, I guess it could be, you know. Well, maybe we should change the bill to say it has to be used in Minnesota, and that it doesn't go to Africa or New York City or other community, because we need to make sure that we put guardrails on all the money that's spending. And then, yes, should we also include that this nonprofit must deliver a report to the legislature in it within 18 months, saying with detailed expenditures and how they spent it. And look, I'm a capitalist, but we're talking about nonprofits here. Maybe we should put caps on the salaries of directors and board members of the nonprofit. During COVID, there was a $9 million line item that was to be delivered to food shelves. Okay, during COVID, Aaron May Quaid, now a senator, but former legislator at the time, was a board member of a nonprofit that bill was written to give money directly to that group. And it said in the bill that the money did not need to be used for food. Not $9 million to a food shelf, and it didn't have to be used for food. I stood up on the House floor and railed on that provision. And Aaron May Quaid, trolled me on Twitter because of it. But it's that kind of crap that needs to stop. And Carlos Mariani, right, really nice guy, legislator, he was chair of public safety. He got money in the bill, $250,000, I think, or maybe only 45,000 for his own nonprofit that he is the executive director of.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it just stinks to high heaven when the money just flows out the door, or if it isn't named directly to give money to that group. It is to give money to a group, and they put such guardrails on it, or such targeted language, that it can only be one group. There's millions of dollars, I think $4 million a year, that goes out to through the Positive Alternatives Grant Program that was put forward by Republicans more than a decade ago to give money to groups that would help women who are pregnant and seeking alternatives to abortion. They're going through now and rewording that language so that so basically it goes to Planned Parenthood. They're not saying
Right.
Planned Parenthood,
Yeah.
but they're putting
Right.
language in there that the only recipient that could apply for it would be Planned Parenthood. And that's also a terrible way to legislate. It's corrupt. But if you see bills come through committee, think of all the ways that it could be abused, and then offer amendments to just change the language. And you can say, well, couldn't this money be used to do this? Like, well, we wouldn't do that. Well, then let's just write something in there that says that it can't. So that will put everybody's minds at ease.
Yeah. No, this is the nut right here. This is the core of the whole operation and how things work down here in St. Paul. And you used the word corrupt, and I think that is an accurate word to use, because indeed there are so many people down here with election certificates have as their day job publicly funded recipients of public grants at nonprofits that are receiving dollars that these same people are voting on. It is now, by a strict reading, like, can I file ethics complaints against all these people? Well, I could. Would it go anywhere? Probably not. Why? Because in order for it to truly be a conflict of interest by the strict reading of the law, it would have to be something that's directly and personally benefits one single legislator for it to be a conflict of interest. But if they are clever in how they write it, and they say, well, we want to give this money to groups that do X, Y, and Z, and their group happens to do X, Y, and Z, and multiple recipients get it, then they can say, well, I wasn't voting to give myself money. I just happened to get it in the end because we do such a great job over at Super Happy Fun Time Sunshine and Rainbows Corporation.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, this is the, and you talk about shifting grant money from pregnancy resource centers to Planned Parenthood. That's the thing, is that this is political in the market. When you if nonprofits ran in the way that I think a lot of people presume that they run, which is with a hat in their hand on the street corner begging for money, then they would have to demonstrate to their donors, this is what we're doing and how good we are at it, in order to get money. which pregnancy resource centers do that, by the way. And that's why they raise incredible amounts of money and meet with tremendous success and have a great public impact on their community, because they can produce the receipts and they have the goods. But if your true goal is not the impact upon the community, but the furtherance of your political agenda, well, that's where you need state power to come into play and say, and to snatch that money up and say, nope, yoink, you don't get it, because I'm going to give it to my friend over here. And that's what's going on down here in St. Paul, and it needs to stop.
Yeah. Walter, we've just got a few minutes left. I want you to cover something that happens outside the legislature. I know that legislators get frequently invited to different speaking engagements. I heard that you were going to give a speech at a Christian university, and then because of who you are and what party you're in, your invitation was rescinded. Is that true?
Yeah, I'll put some meat on those bones, but that's generally accurate. This is something that the community member, constituent, kid who goes to my church, this is something that's been in development for weeks and months before, well before I got elected, back during the campaign. He wanted to bring me and another speaker in to do an event, a panel discussion on the topic of Christian unity and what that even means and how it applies. So it wasn't even an inherently political topic. It was just, let's talk about Christian unity and what we mean by that. And at first he was told, and by the way, this kid used to be part of a Turning Point USA chapter at the University of Northwestern, which is the institution in question. The administration shut that group down. So that tells you where they're coming from, right? And so the students, including this kid who goes to my church, organized another group that's not Turning Point USA, but has roughly the same intention and purpose of just, let's have some conversations about stuff from a conservative perspective, which ought to be a welcome ideological exploration on a university campus, particularly one that claims to be Christian of all things. And they once again attempted to say, let's have this event, let's bring in these folks. And at first they were told, well, you can't bring in Walter Hudson because he's running for office. And we can't have somebody who's actively campaigning. It's going to look like we're supporting his campaign, blah, blah, blah. Okay, sure, fair, got it. We'll wait until after the election, and then we'll set something up once session starts. So that's what we were going to do. And indeed, what we did. And February 9th, which is tomorrow, is when it was supposed to occur at the University of Northwestern. But there was an administrative hangup. They weren't getting like the final approvals that they needed in order to put the event in place, and therefore could not promote it, because if it hasn't been approved, you can't promote it. And, day after day goes by, week after week goes by. Well, earlier this week, the week of the event, they've got their final notification that the event has not been approved. And from what I'm told, they moved the goalpost, right? They went from saying that, oh, he can't do it because you can't have Walter Hudson because he's a candidate for office, to you can't have Walter Hudson because he's a sitting legislator, which makes zero sense at all. You're telling me that you don't have, as a university, you don't have guests who are current public officials, elected or otherwise? And then they also threw in there that I and this other gentleman, I forget his name, who were going to be part of this panel, are inflammatory. Inflammatory. So I, who speak with zeal in defense of the gospel for the furtherance of Christ, am too inflammatory for a Christian church in St. Paul. Something's wrong. Something smells in Denmark. Okay. This, and I would say that whatever controversy University of Northwestern was trying to avoid by not having me speak there may be eclipsed by the controversy that they may have just generated by refusing to let me speak there. Because all I was going to do, all I planned on doing, was going to the University of Northwestern and having an open and honest conversation with the students who chose to attend about what Christian unity means, what it entails, how we ought to think about it, and how we ought to define it. There's nothing inherent in that topic that should prickle anybody's hackles. Nobody's hackles should be raised by that topic. If you have a counter, if you want to argue my points, which you don't even know because you didn't even let me say them, but if you want to argue my points, come argue them. and we can have a robust conversation. It's a university. That's how it's supposed to work, right? Socratic method. Educated men in the square having a conversation about philosophy. That's what your institution is supposed to do. And it's a Christian topic for a Christian school. But you said no. And so now you get to have the story being that you don't want to have a black, Republican, conservative, Christian legislator come talk to your students about Christian unity. Have fun. Have fun with that. Because I think there might be some alumni and donors and parents and Christian supporters who are going to want to ask you why.
Right. And, I really support going after their donors to make sure that they're aware of what happened. There's a definite line between private and public universities that I don't cross. I was chief author of a bill to promote free speech on campus. I've worked to hammer on colleges in Minnesota that try to create a free speech zone, like out in the mall in this little area, when they should be free speech everywhere on campus because It's a public college and university. But for private universities, honestly, we try to give them more leeway, but this is not right. And their donors should be made aware of what's going on in their university, especially Christian donors that are donating for a specific purpose and cause. So I know you got a hard stop here, Walter. I'm going to let you go. And I want to really thank the listeners for tuning in for another episode of the Omnibus Podcast, where all subjects are germane.